Welcome to our Tuesday live leadership chats. Today I'm talking with Bishop Stephen Hale, who is one of the greatest chairs that I have ever worked with and also the chair of Christian Coaching Institute. And today we're talking about how do you get a realistic sense of yourself. My name is Kylie Butler and I'm a part of Christian Coaching Institute, which is Australia's leading Christian coaching organisation. And we've been coaching and training leaders in coaching for over 10 years now. So welcome, Stephen. It is so good to have you on our call today. Before we jump into today's topic, tell us a little bit about who you are, some of the roles that you're currently fulfilling, and also what do you love doing?
Well, thank you, Kylie. It's great to be with you today. And it is surprising that you said I'm the best chair you've ever had. You've only had two, so. But
I know. I hope the other one's not watching.
Hey? A limited comparison, but anyway, it has been a privilege to chair the board of Christian Coaching Institute. Yeah. I'm currently the acting vicar of a church called St. Colum's Hawthorn in obviously Hawthorn, which has been fun, and I'm the Victorian Director of Overseas Council Australia, which is a mission agency that supports theological education in the developing world. Prior to that, I was the vicar at St. Hilary's Kew for a decade. I'm sort of theoretically retired, although I'm currently working 6 days a week. So work that one out. Yeah. I guess there's lots of things I'm interested in. I used to love great holidays, but can't remember the last time I had a great holiday. So, but we enjoy good coffee. We've moved to the inner city, so we've become sort of inner city snobs. Love living in this part of the world. And if you're going to be stuck in 5Ks in lockdown, good place to be.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. And so, Stephen, recently you've been doing some study on sense of self, and in particular, a biblical view on a sense of self.
Yeah, well, I think
there's hear what you've discovered.
Sure. There's a lot of material around this issue and a lot of secular resources, which I think are often excellent and really helpful, but we don't always have a clear biblical framework. And a number of years ago, I stumbled onto Galatians chapter 6, verses 2-5, where we have this kind of lovely balance between carrying each other's burdens, which we all know that verse. And then Paul goes on surprisingly to say that we should have to carry each other's load. So it kind of, I think there's a little passage, it's a little gem, gives us a framework for how we can have a biblical framework for thinking about this issue of how do I sort out who I am as a person, what I'm capable of, what I'm good at, what I'm not so good at, the way in which I work with other people and the way in which I maybe don't work so well with other people. What's my personality, my particular leadership style, all those sorts of things. It doesn't answer all those questions, but I think it gives a really neat, helpful framework for that.
And so let's dive in a little bit deeper. What does it mean to have a true sense of self?
Sure. Well, I think at the end of the day, we all hope that we'll get to a position where we've kind of got a sense of self-awareness about who we are, what God has wired us to do, and where we're best placed to lead and to minister. And look, none of us sort that out overnight. That's a kind of a lifelong journey, really, and it keeps evolving. As context changes and as we age and we go into different levels of responsibility. But I mean, we all know leaders who, in a sense, have a certain self-perception about themselves that no one else affirms, but they just plow on regardless. I think the interesting thing is in Galatians chapter 6, Paul puts it this way. He says, if any of you think you are something when you are nothing, you deceive yourselves. Now, that's the negative way of thinking about it. We shouldn't be self-deceived. So we want to have a positive sense of who we are, a positive sense of what we're capable of, and a positive sense of what it is that God's wired us to do.
Yeah.
That will involve, using some tools like DISC or personality profile style stuff, and healthy teams will do those sorts of processes because that gives you a framework for having a conversation about these things. But at the end of the day, we don't want to be in a position where we're either leading in situations where we're not suited, and that happens to lots of people, or we're in situations where we're not functioning effectively, or where we're not functioning effectively and we're totally unaware of the fact that we're not functioning effectively. That would be pretty tragic. But sadly, it does happen a fair bit.
Yeah. And so with that, when we're kind of trying to discover ourselves, but we're kind of doing it with others or around others, like how do you discover yourself and work with others?
Sure. Well, that's where the first principle comes in the passage, which is that we should carry each other's load. So you don't sort out who you are as a leader and what you're capable of in isolation. It's not like an intellectual project where you just enroll in a course and at the end of it, you've sorted it all out. It's done in context and it's done in community. And I think part of the profound nature of what it means to carry each other's load is not just around, helping each other out when we've got a problem, which is part of what the verse is generally often applied to, but it's helping each other to work through this. So if you're part of a team, which most people will be, it's working with the other team to have honest, robust interactions and conversations so that together you actually help each other to become more realistic. And that will mean hopefully, you'll be in a situation where if you are working in a team, you'll be properly supervised. If you're the leader of the team, you'll be accountable to someone external, either your coach, with the Community Coaching Institute here.
Yeah, good work, well done.
who you have honest, robust conversations with about saying, well, the other week I was involved in doing this and it didn't go so well. And I'm not sure what was going on, and thinking through the implications of all of that, and then being open to rigorous feedback so that there is a basis for clarifying the challenges that you've got, because we all have our challenges, and to then being willing to actually do something about that.
Yeah.
So that's about some accountability.
Yeah.
But also the individual has to want to actually be part of this process and to engage with it well, because we're not going to go to the next level as a leader unless we do it. Yeah.
And so you talked about that sense of carrying the load earlier and kind of carrying each other's load, but there's got to come a point where we've actually got to carry our own load. Like we've got to do that ourselves. Like what's the point that we actually need to do that, or when do we need to do that?
Well, the great thing in the passage is that Paul finished off this little section by saying that each of us has to carry our own load. So that's why I like the passage. I think it's a really nice framework.
Yeah.
Carry each other's load. And at the end of the day, you also have a personal responsibility to come before God and to carry your own load, because at the end of the day, only you can be accountable for what you're doing, and only you can be actively a part of the process of kind of working out who you are, what you're capable of, how God's wired you, how that impacts other people, how you need to grow or how you need to change. And if you're deeply resistant to that, then nothing's going to happen, and other people will suffer as a consequence. I mean, at present, I think every Christian leader I've spoken to is listening to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. I don't know anybody who isn't listening to it. And, it's a profound insight into an incredibly gifted leader who was totally unaccountable and a law unto himself, and it had terrible consequences. So, that's an extreme example. So we have to ultimately accept personal responsibility and have a personal willingness to actually go through all of this. But we do need other people to help us and encourage us.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing along the way in the passage is that Paul talks about the fact that we can actually take pride in ourselves. I mean, in an era that's probably past, there was a phase where you just never, ever took pride in anything you did, because that would be sinful. I remember way back when I was a student minister, I publicly praised someone for doing something and got told off after the service.
Wow.
Because the person said, if you keep doing that, people will get a big head and then they'll be suffering from the sin of pride, and that would be really unhealthy. So,
wow.
I mean, most people today probably can't relate to that issue, but that was certainly around a long time ago. But I think, we ought to be able to get to a point where we are rightly proud of things that we've been able to be a part of under God. We're never going to get it perfect, but we've all hopefully been a part of some great things that have happened. And at the end of it, you should be rightly able to go, well, that was fantastic.
Yeah, it was good to be a part.
And if you've had a particular issue or challenge that you've been working on, and, like I was just in a coaching session today where I've had a person that I've been coaching who's been incredibly gentle with the staff that he's been leading, and I've been encouraging him to kind of become a bit more, take a bit more of a lead with them, which he's starting to do, and he's seeing really good results. Now, there were reasons why he was being so gentle, which we've talked about, but he's faced that. He's seeing some better outcomes. Everyone's happier as a consequence, and he ought to be proud about that.
Yeah.
I think that's a really healthy place to be, So we ought to be working with each other, helping each other. We've got to all be working towards having a realistic sense of self, and you're not going to grow as a leader and be able to take on more responsibility if you actually aren't engaging with that. But we also, at the end of the day, have to accept personal responsibility and accountability
for that. So if there was one thing for leaders who might be watching that want to kind of gain a better sense of themselves, what would you encourage them to kind of do next or make sure they've got in place?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, we all need another person in our life outside of ourselves and our context who we engage with. So for me, I was incredibly fortunate way back prior to the Christian Coaching Institute, where a guy called John Mallison, who was a legendary Australian church leader, was my personal mentor. And looking back, I was incredibly privileged to have him in my life because I could ring him up anytime. It wasn't a structured relationship because in the way that things are these days, and talk through things. He would always be praying about it. And, that was one of many things, part of the ways in which I've grown. I mean, I think the other thing is probably in all this, all of us at various points will get fairly brutal feedback, from people who are parishioners or from other people that we're working with. Sometimes it won't be very helpful. And that's where you've got to, if you want to have a realistic sense of yourself, you've got to have a way of stepping back from that. And well, what was going on there? It wasn't very helpfully conveyed, but maybe there's something going on that I need to be aware of. And I think the other thing to say about it is we never arrive on this in this space. It's a work in progress, and it goes on for the whole of your life. I mean, I'm in a totally new situation these days where I don't have the same level of positional authority I'm used to having, and that's quite challenging personally. So it's a question of, adjusting to that and working out how I minister and lead in that space. So that's a new phase of life that I'm working through. Which I'm talking through with my supervisor.
Excellent. I love it. Stephen, thank you so much for just sharing your insight today, but also for who you are as a leader and the significant input and impact that you have made to the Australian Christian landscape over many decades. It's such an honour and a privilege to work with you and to be able to have you on our Facebook Live today. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
We really appreciate that.
Great. A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's good to have you. Thank you everybody for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 1:00. Have a great day.